All right, so today we're talking about SQL and specifically SQLite and how we can integrate that with Node. So if you've built anything with Node, if you've built websites or APIs, chances are when you started off, you started with a document database like MongoDB. But SQL, structured query language, is the language used for relational databases. And you can also use relational databases with Node-based applications. So you can build an API that uses MySQL, PostgreSQL, or PostgreSQL, or SQLite, or others. You just need to have the right module to connect to the database. And then the commands that you're sending, instead of using, say, MongoDB being hosted on Atlas and you're sending commands and you're using something like Mongoose to manage the schemas and the models and all of your queries. With SQL-based relational databases, you are sending SQL commands. So this tutorial is not about the SQL language itself. It's honestly a very simple language to learn. I've got a playlist on MySQL which teaches the SQL language. I'll link that at the end of the video. Also down in the description you'll find a link to that playlist. So if you want to learn more about SQL, you can do that. SQLite is, as the name would imply, a very lightweight relational database. So instead of building documents that look like JSON, what you're building are tables, and multiple tables connect together relationally. There'll be one column of data that links up with a column in the other table. And these tables all just look like spreadsheets. So columns and rows of data. So we're going to use SQLite3 with Node.js, and we're going to build a quick little application, a quick little API. So I'm also going to use Express, and I'm going to use Body Parser to be able to work with this, but I'm going to keep it very lightweight, 2 JavaScript files running the whole thing. Okay, so empty folder to begin with in VS Code. We're going to turn this into a npm project. So our npm init command, just to create our package.json file. Inside of here, because I want to use more modern JavaScript, instead of using the require keyword old common JS includes, we're going to add type module here in the package.json. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to use the import and export keywords. So ES modules. So everything that works in the browser for imports and exports is going to work here in Node.js as well, just by adding this one line. All right, so that's done. Then what we want to do is we want to import the packages that we're going to need. So first of all, we'll do an npm install of Express and Body Parser. Those are the two things that are not connected to SQLite or SQL. It's just what we need to build our basic little API. Then we're going to actually bring in SQLite3. So npm install SQLite3. That's the package that we want. If we go to GitHub, this link is down in the description as well. So here's the documentation. Talks about SQLite and all the different things. If you want to find the actual package, if you go to npm.js and you search for SQLite, inside of here we can look for SQLite here, and it's SQLite3. That's the modern one, that's the most recent one, that's the one that we want to be using here. All right, so we have that installed. If we look in our dependencies, there they are. There's the 3 dependencies, and this is the version of SQLite3 that we're using. Okay, so we need an initial file for our API. We're going to create a file, app.js, index.js, call it whatever you like. This is the home page. This is where we're going to be setting up our Express application to run. And we're also going to add another file here, just breaking our code up into modules. We're going to have one called connect.js. Inside here, what we want to do is actually connect to the database to create tables as they're needed. All that kind of stuff, that initial management stuff that everything else is going to rely on. All the endpoints in our API are going to have to talk to the database. This is how we're going to connect. So we will first import the module, and this syntax again is why I added that type module into the package.json. So we want to bring in SQLite3 from the SQLite3 package. There we go. We've imported that. And then inside of here, we're going to actually connect to the database. So connect to the driver that can talk to it. So SQLite3.verbose. Now, I use this command verbose because it gives us the version that's going to give us all the log messages. So when something goes wrong, we can log it to a file, we can log it out to the console to know exactly what worked and what didn't. Okay, so there we have it. We are connected to that. Now, what we need to do is connect to a specific database. So there's the program, and then there's the database itself that we're going to create. This is what we want to do here. Now, there's basically 3 different ways that you can connect. So I'm going to create a database object, this DB, that we're going to use outside of here. At the end of this file, what we're going to do is we're going to say, I'm going to export DB like this, or I could export default DB, whichever way you want to do it. So with this, I'm going to need these curly braces back in index.js. So I can say import DB from our file here, connect.js. So that brings it in. Or if I say export default DB without the curly braces, over here, again, without the curly braces, does the same thing. So now what I'm doing here is I need to connect to the database. And I said there were 3 different ways that we could do it. We're going to call our SQL3. This is the connection to the database here. I want to connect to a specific database, so I'm going to call the database method. Now there's 3 different ways that we can do it. They all take the same 3 arguments. The first one is, okay, what's the name of the database? Second one is, what is the purpose of connecting to the database, we'll say. So SQLite3, and these are constants that will be available to you. You can see there's a whole list of them. Why are you connecting to this specific database? Is it just to create it and then you're going to shut it down? Are you just going to be reading some data? You just need it briefly for that. Is it shared cache, or read-write is the most common thing. So I'm going to talk to the database. I'm going to read some data from it. I'm going to add data to it. I'm going to delete data. I'm going to update data. All those different things that you normally do with CRUD operations with a database. So CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete. So that's the purpose for us connecting to this database. And then there will be a callback. So 3 different ways. All of them take the mode. All of them have a callback that we'll have here. So we're going to create our function connected, just so I can use the same function for all 3 of them. The difference is going to come down to what we pass inside of here. Now the first one, if I say memory, what I'm doing is I'm asking it to create this database in memory. So it's not an actual file, it's just memory. While Node is running, some memory is set aside and the database is kept in that memory. But as soon as Node shuts down, like once the script is done running and Node shuts down, we've lost the database. The second one is with an anonymous file. So you just put an empty string in here. It does the same thing, but what it does is it creates a temporary file. So it's using the file system to create a temporary file. We don't know what the name of the file is, but there it is. It's an anonymous file on the file system, and we're working with that. And so there's a chance that it could still be there when it shuts down, but likely it will be deleted. And the third option is you actually give it a name. So, hey, I'm going to have a file called mydata.db. This is going to be my database file. So it's created the first time we connect, and then we're able to use it. And then if Node shuts down and starts up again, the data is still going to be there in the file. So you decide what's the best option for your application. I'm going to use the third one. All 3 of these work the same way. When the connection is made, you get this callback function is called. Whether it worked or didn't, this function is going to be called. If there's an error, it's going to be inside this object. If that was not an error, If there was no error connecting to the database, this will be undefined. So if it is defined, well, what do we want to do? Do you want to return the error object? Are you going to do this? Are you going to handle that in the other file? Are you just going to console log? We're just going to return, and we'll write something to the console here. So I'll say console.log error.message, and then returns, so it exits. So undefined is going to be returned. There is not going to be a connection here, but we're handling the error is the important thing. Console.log, if we get past that point, hey, we are connected to the database, or SQLite DB does already exist. So created the database. I guess it's a better thing to write here. There we go. Okay, so we have a message written to the console once we've connected to it. Now, you could just leave it at this. If this is all that you need to do, you just need to connect to it, great. We have a connected file. We can import that over here, and we have the database to use. But we have to think about this application in terms of this is the first time that this is running. And it's either the first time or it's any other subsequent time. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually create a table that we can use here. We're just building a simple little application. So we're only going to have one table. You can create as many as you want. But inside here, we're going to create a string, a SQL string, and then we're going to call one of these commands. We have this database object right here. So db.run. I'll remove listener. There we go. There's going to be a few commands that we can use. We're going to talk about some more alternative commands, but if you're doing something like inserting data, updating a table, updating information, deleting information, you're creating a brand new table, you're changing the structure of a table, the run is the method that you're going to use to do any of those things. So inside of here, the SQL command is what we want to use. And then if there's any parameters that you're going to pass in, so if there's data that needs to be used inside of this query, the second argument is the params. Now you can put just a long list of arguments, but if you do that, you lose this callback option here, which is really valuable. So we don't want to lose the callback function. Right here, there's going to be a callback function. We don't want to lose that. So if we use an array here, we can put as many arguments for this SQL into this, and we still get our callback function. I don't have anything dynamic to put in here. I'm just going to say, hey, I want to create table. So this is our first SQL statement. So if you know SQL, you know exactly what I'm doing here. If you've never worked with SQL before, what we're doing is exactly what it sounds like. We're creating one of those tables that we're going to use to store data. Again, columns and rows, just think spreadsheet. So I'm going to have an enemy ID. I'm going to have an enemy name. And what we're building here is a mortal enemies list. So I'm just quickly going to type this out. And there we go. So we've got ID, name, and the reason why they are mortal enemy. Now I said earlier that SQLite is a very lightweight database, and that's true. It has got a very limited list of data types. When you're picking data types for columns for SQLite, you have null. Same as in JavaScript, null. It's nothing. So if you're not going to have any information in there, null is the type. You can use that as a column type. You've got text, which is any string value, or if you've got dates, you're saving those as strings as well. We have integers, so numbers without decimal places. You've got real, which is a number with a decimal place. And you've got blob, binary large objects. So integer, real are the two number types. Text for strings and strings of any length, or dates. you've got null, and you've got blob. And that's it. Just those 5 types. Everything has to be grouped into one of those 5 kinds of data. So we're creating here a very simple table. Create table called enemies. There's going to be 3 columns. 1 is an integer, 2 of them are text. That's what we've created, or that's what we're creating here when we do this db run command. So if it works or doesn't work, there's going to be that error object that comes back, and we can write out that error. So we can say if error, I can throw an error, wrap this in a try catch, or I'm just going to write to the console. I'm not expecting any issues right here. We're trying to keep this as short as possible. I know I'm talking a lot, so I'm trying to keep the code as compact as possible. So error creating enemies table. Console log created table. Okay. So created the database, created the table, and actually we should put a return inside of here so it leaves at that point. So there's the return. Now, I was saying before, this SQL statement, this command, we have to bear in mind if it's the first time that this database is running, or our application is running, or if it's any subsequent time. This is going to work fantastic the first time, but the second time I launch it, it's going to have a problem. It's going to say, hey, I've already got an enemies table. What are you doing? So to avoid that error, there's actually a phrase that we can add in here, a clause called if not exists. We add that inside of here, and it's going to say, okay, if this thing already exists, I don't need to do any of this. If it does exist, or if it doesn't exist, I will create the table with this name and these columns. Now, if you want to change it, that's when we would bring in the alter table command, and you could make changes to that. Down in the description, I've also got a link to a great SQLite tutorial that's got all of the SQL commands. So you've got my MySQL tutorial and this written SQLite tutorial give you all the information for learning more about SQL through those. Okay, so we have database exported. We've connected to SQLite. We've created the database. We're connected to the database. We've created the table if it doesn't exist. And that's our connected file. So we have that. And now we can build something that's nice and lightweight, a simple little API. So we're going to import the things that we had earlier, body parser and express. Let's do express first. And because I use that type module, this is the syntax I'm using for express. Most of the tutorials and documentation you'll find online will have that require command. I prefer the import. I like to use ES modules, both client-side and server-side, so that's what we're doing here. So body parser from body parser. There we go, we have that. And app const app equals express. So we're creating our express server, and then we're going to add the body parser as middleware. Body parser.json. There we go. So I've got a tutorial on Express, but if you haven't seen that, basically we're creating a little server online that is going to be the API. You send a request, you get a response. And then the middleware, what we're saying is, hey, you know what? If somebody in the request is sending you some actual data, we're going to assume it's JSON, and we're going to use this module to read the JSON string and actually give us an object that we can work with. It's going to convert the JSON string in the body into usable JavaScript objects. That's all this is doing. Now, for each of those endpoints that I talked about, so the way Express works, just very briefly, you have a method for each of the HTTP verbs. So HTTP get, post, put, patch, delete, head, options, all those. App.get for the home root. This is going to be the callback function here, and all we want to do is say, hey, you know what, if somebody sent a request, we're going to send back status 200 with a little piece of text saying, yep, we're online, we're working, it's running. So there we go. The status code for our response object is going to be 200, and res.send, what are we sending back? let's just say immortal enemy service is online. There we go. All right, so that is just sort of a test endpoint. And down at the very bottom, when we're working with our API, we want to be able to say that, or we want it to be able to listen for these requests coming into these various endpoints. So we need to add the method at the bottom here. Listen, hey, what port number do you want to listen on? And when we are connected, again, same as what we're doing with SQLite on the connect page here, there's an error object that you can listen for. So if error, now I've got very limited error handling here, but I am putting something in place. So I'm at least writing a message to my console. That should be port 3000, not part 3000. Okay, so there we go. Bare minimum API. We've got an endpoint. We're listening. So when I start my script here, when I say node index.js, there we go. It's listening. And SQLite can't open. Cool. So that was the error here. Now, we added the name. This is the approach that we wanted to use, but it doesn't exist yet. We have to actually create that. So let's Control-C, stop this running. We're going to create that file so we can use it. And the quickest, simplest way to do that is just the touch command. So we're going to say that we want to create a file called this. Just with the touch command. There it is. Now it exists. So we have our file. Now if I run our script again. Oh, error creating enemies table. So we'll shut this down. And my problem's right here, looking at this SQL statement. I shouldn't have that comma at the end. Bad habits from JavaScript. So we don't want the comma after these three things have been added, so I'll save that. We'll run this again. There we go. So listening. So the API is running. We created the table. Created the database, or the database exists and we're connected to it. And then we created the table. So this SQL statement right here, this worked as well. So we have this table created. There's no data in it yet, but it is there. And if I jump back to the browser and we jump over to localhost, if I refresh this, we have no API endpoint, but right at the root, there we go. Mortal enemy service is online. So we are up and running. Excellent. So let's close this now. What we want to do is create the endpoints for the things that are going to talk to the database. So we're going to create a get endpoint. So we'll say if I get that, and then there's the request and the response object. And we'll do this twice more. We'll do one for get, one for post, and one for delete. We'll just do those three. So get, we're going to request all the data that's inside the enemies table. So, hey, give me everything that's been created. If somebody makes a request to the same endpoint with the get method, we're going to be saying, hey, I'm adding data. So there should be data inside the body of the request object that's going to give me the information that I can put into the database. And for the delete, I'm going to be removing a single item from the table. And we want to return a success message. So this is going to be everything. This is just going to be a success message. This will be a success message after we've added something. Okay. So those are our three endpoints that we've created. Inside of here, let's actually get into this and start doing some SQLite. Now, for this, what I'm going to do as well is bring it up here. I've got POSTMAN set up. Sorry, we are. And for these three endpoints, I've created endpoint requests here. So when I make a GET request inside of here, if this is up and running, so if I start up our server again, when I make a request to this endpoint here, I should send a request. Now I'm getting an error because I don't have anything being returned yet, but that's fine. This is going to give us all the data from the database. My post, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a request to here. I'm going to say it's the method post being used. I want to upload it. And then under body, I'm going to put, here's some data. So we're going to add Vladimir Putin to our enemies list. And there it is. And over here, when I want to delete something, I'm going to pass through the query string. There's not going to be anything in the body. The body's going to be empty. But what I want to delete under params, so in the query string here, so I'm going to have the ID number and then some number for the enemy ID that I want to remove from the list. So these are the endpoints that we're creating. Okay, inside of our API get. So we're going to get all the enemies from the list, or from the table. All right, we're going to say that we're going to be returning content type application/JSON. What we're going to return is JSON. So we need to run a SQL statement. So my SQL statement is going to be very simple. I'm going to say select everything from the enemies table. That's the command. And the data that I'm going to return, that I'm going to turn into my JSON string, is going to be this, something like this. You can have a message in here as well. You can add other things, but I'm going to have an object inside of it. There's going to be an enemies property, and I'm going to put all the data as objects inside of here. So this is what's going to be returned when somebody makes a request using get to this endpoint. All right, now, when working with your SQL, you want to make sure that you are always doing a try-catch around this. You don't want your application to crash. You want to be able to throw errors or handle errors that are thrown by SQLite itself. So we're going to start with a try-catch. Inside of here is where we're going to be able to do these things. Now, we looked at DB run before. That was how we created the table. If I was doing an insert, update, delete, so down here in my post and delete, I'm going to use run. But here, for get, I've got two options. One is get. This is going to return a single row. So if I'm just looking for one row from my spreadsheet, from my table, this is the method that I would use. But if I want everything, it's going to be all. So SQL, and just like the run command, we've got three parameters. SQL is the SQL statement. Then if there were any variables that needed to be inserted here, they would go into the params, into this array. And then we have a callback. So there's going to be an error object if something fails. And then the second parameter is going to be rows. This is like an array of all the rows being returned from that database. As always, if error, what do you want to do? Well, let's just throw it and let the catch handle it. If there is no error, we're good. And the rows object that we get back here, this is an iterable, and it has a for each method that we can call. So for each row inside that data, we want to add it to here. We're going to put it inside of here. So what we're going to say is data.enemies. So this property of this object right here, we're pointing at this array, we want to add to that. So we're going to push something, and it's going to be an object. It's going to have an ID. It's going to have a name, and it's going to have a reason. Those are going to be the names of the three properties that we put inside there. And we're going to get from this array, we're getting the individual rows. Inside the row, we're talking to the database now. These are the rows from the database. And the columns that we created were these ones: enemy ID, enemy name, enemy reason. Now you can have the same property names here, or the same column names, and then use the same property names here. I'm doing them differently just so that you can be clear about where each is coming from to see that you don't have to do the same. So we've got row.enemy_ID, and then we've got row.enemy_name and row.enemy_reason. Those were the column names that we were using up above or in the connect file. These three names right here. So we have those values being placed into an object right here that we are pushing into this array. So now we're going to have an actual thing. If we want, we can console log here inside this loop, inside the for each function. We don't need to do that, so I'm just going to go and take that data. So the content that I want to return to POSTMAN, to the browser, wherever it is, json.stringify, and data is going to be that. Now the reason that I'm not just taking rows and calling json.stringify, I don't want the object coming back from SQLite3 that it's going to give me. I want to actually build my own custom object that I return. And this is going to be the data that I specifically want. If there's other properties inside of this rows object, I don't want those. I don't want those going to the browser. I only want the things that I am specifically requesting out of each row to be sent back. So we do that and then express the response, send, and we're going to send back content, which is our object from right here converted into a JSON string. That's what we're sending back. And so now I should have that. We can Control C and restart this in the browser. If we go to the API endpoint, the default in the browser is get. There we go. So I'm getting a response back, enemies, and it is an empty array. Same thing if I go over to POSTMAN and we do a send request again. There we go. Here is the response. It's an empty array inside of here. Okay, back into here. Let's do the post. So quickly fly through this one. We're doing the same sort of thing. The response that we send back is going to be this. There is going to be a SQL statement. So post is when you're adding data into the database. So we do need to have a response in there. Oh yeah, I left out this. I didn't handle the error. So there is an error that's coming back. You should send something back to POSTMAN or the browser if something fails for some reason. So what we're going to do is we will console log for ourselves. This is going to come up in the console down below here, or the server logs. We're going to say, hey, whatever the error message was, let's write that out. Then we need to send something back. And I'm going to send an HTTP status code of 467, which has no current meaning. Like there's nothing attached to that number, but it's in the range of, hey, there's something wrong with the information. There's something wrong with the request. It's not an error per se with the code. It's a problem with the data. There's something that's not working right. And then res.send, the response that we're going to send back is going to be a JSON string code. And we'll put the same number in here, 467, and then a status. So that code's going to be our error message. And then inside here, let's get the error.message, just so there's something. There we go. So the error that was thrown right here, we're getting its message, and we're going to send that back along with this error code. That's what's going to go back if there's something that goes wrong. So we are handling it in the catch. For our post, same idea. We're going to do this. We're going to have a try catch. And let's bring this same information down here. And we could do a different number. We could do, so okay, this one's going to be 468 maybe, just to help you diagnose issues later on. So you've got the different status code. The SQL statement, it's no longer going to be select from, it's going to be insert into enemies. And then you list off the columns that you want to insert into. Now we have an integer field here. It's going to auto increment for us. So enemy ID, we don't have to put because it's automatically going to put a number in there for us if it's the primary key. For enemy name and enemy reason, yes, we do need those. So let's just put these, enemy name and enemy reason. There we have it. So there's the two. And here is how we put variables into it. So this is the SQL statement. We're going to take the values that are coming in from this post. The thing that we're going to use, let me shrink this down. The body parser is going to read it out of the body. We're going to get the JSON string that's coming in the body turned into a JavaScript object so we can get those actual two variables and place them into these two spots in this order. So we've got the SQL. That's going to be the new thing. And if you want to know what the ID is, so let's create a variable right here. Let me fix that. There we go. So we'll say that. Let new ID. This is going to be the variable where I place the auto incremented, the created ID that is being used. So we can send that back as well if we want. So we will say I'm going to do a try catch here. And we're going to use db.run, not get, not all, but run, because it's an insert, update, delete command. And inside of here, this is the command that we're running. And then params. Okay, we're going to need the params that we're going to get out of the request object right here. This is the request object that's coming in, and it has a property, console log it here, request.body. That's going to be the actual string, the JSON string that's coming in. We want that, or it's the JSON string that's been turned into a JavaScript object. So we want to get this, and then inside of it, we're hoping to find a property inside there called name and a property called reason. So that's what we're going to put here and here inside of this rec.body.name and rec.body.reason. Those are the properties that we want. Now I'm going to have a callback function here, and it is important here that I use a regular function, not an arrow function, because I need to use the keyword this to refer back to this database object. So we're going to get inside of here the error object, as always, and handle that if error, throw new error, or just throw error. There we go. There's the error object. We're going to throw it, so the catch down here will handle it. But if it has worked, we want to get the ID. Hey, you just created something in the table. There's a new row in this enemies table. I want to know what's the enemy ID for that. Well, we can get that from this dot last ID. So this is a built-in property. So the database that we're talking to, this dot last ID will give me the auto increment value. So provides the auto increment integer ID, enemy ID. So we have that, so we can include it in the message that we send back. Now we've already said that we're sending back JSON, so we don't have to set that again. But inside of here, we're going to say res status. I don't want the default 200, I want 201, which is the proper status to say when you've created a new thing on the server. Yes, this post was successful. I have created a new record of some kind, so 201 is the proper status to send back. And then the data that I'm going to return, we can set a property like status. We can say, yeah, 201, and then the message that we want to return is going to be mortal enemy, and then we'll take our new ID, saved. Okay, so we have that. And then our content that we're going to return, again, JSON.stringify, just like before. Take our data, convert it into a JSON string so that we can send it back. Okay, so we have a post being sent now. So let's shut this down and restart it. No errors, good. So in the post, we're going to submit this. So we send the request. There we go. Mortal enemy 1 saved. Okay, now we can put something else inside of here. So let's say Dame Judy Dench. And she knows what she did. There we go. Mortal enemy number 2 has been saved. I can put another one in here. And we send that. There we go. So we're saving records. If we do a get now, no longer going to be an empty array when we send the get request. So get to the endpoint. Now we have this array with all 3 records being created. And this should work in the browser as well. Refresh. There we go. So yes, we have those being saved. We can do it from here. And our last step is going to be the same thing with the delete, where we're going to specify, okay, what's the one that we want to delete. So if I say ID number 1, that's the one that I'm going to delete. We have to actually write the code to do it. So we've got our post, we've got our get, and now we need a delete. We're going to do the same sort of thing. There's going to be a try catch, and we're going to copy over. Let's just copy it from here. The code from the catch. There we go. The result is going to be the same thing. So there's going to be a SQL statement, which will be delete from enemies. We don't need that, but we will need where enemy ID equals question mark. So we need to get this question mark value from the request object, from the parameters that are going to be in the query string. That's what's going to be used inside of here. So we're going to take that. Yeah, so let's do that. So we're going to run a db.run command. And we can't just run the delete statement. So we could say db run SQL. In the params, we need to get from the request object, not the body, but the query string .id. And then there's going to be a callback function there, like this, where inside of here we can check for the error. If error, we do that. And if there is no error, then we're going to send back a response. And we can, by using a regular function here, we can use this keyword again, and changes is going to tell us how many records were affected. So we want that to be 1, preferably. So we can say, okay, if this dot changes equals 1, so there was no delete done. Now, does that mean that there was a problem? Does it mean that just there was no matching record? Well, we can just send back a response, nothing to delete, or something along those lines. So we're going to have something like this. What we'll say, yeah, okay, 200, whatever the operation is, it worked. But the message that we're sending back is going to be something to the effect of no operation needed, something like that. And then if we did delete one, send a message to that effect. And we can say that this right here was deleted. There we go. So there's our message going back. So we have a delete statement. We're getting the value out of the query string and putting it into that SQL statement, calling the function using a regular function so that we can access this.changes, or access this, which will point to the database, so we can say, hey, the operation that I just ran, the SQL statement that I just ran against the database, how many rows were impacted, were affected, were changed based on what I just did? If it's 1, I know that was removed. If it wasn't, there was nothing that was needed to be done, but it's not an error. And so let's Control C and rerun this again. And in my get, we'll run it again to make sure, yes, we still have those 3. And in the delete, if I send it with the number 1, boom, enemy 1 was removed from the list. If we go back to get and we run this, hey, number 2 is the first number now. So 2 and 3 are the only ones left in that list. If I go back to delete and say, hey, let's delete person number 7. There we go. So for the number 7, if we send that, no operation needed. It hasn't broken anything. It's just, there was no matching person for that. And there you go. There is a sort of broad and yet quick look at how you can integrate a SQL database using SQLite3 with a Node application, a Node API. So the code for this, the repo, is linked to down in the description, as well as the links for the playlist for MySQL and the links for the NPM module for SQLite3, the documentation and the tutorial for SQLite as well as down there. So I hope this all made sense. I hope this helps get you started with using SQL databases. Know that it's not just SQLite that you can use. You can use other types of databases as well that are also SQL. It's just a matter of getting the right package installed, so the right module, so you can talk to that database. All right. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments. I answer as many as I have time for. And as always, thanks for listening.